welcome to Small Business Breakthroughs, even though I already welcomed you before, but I'll welcome you again. As I said before, this is a program we've been doing. I think we have probably 50 or 60 of these programs up on our YouTube channel, and we are excited to be able to do this every year for you actually live, because I usually get the opportunity to do this over Zoom, and today I get to do it live with Karen. Although if you go back to August of 2024, you can see where we actually did this on Zoom, and it is on our website. The interesting thing about that one is I usually do this from our Dublin Entrepreneurial Center office, and that one, for whatever reason, I was unable to be there. I had to be in Urbana, Ohio, and I had to call a friend of mine who owns Champaign Telephone Communications in Champaign County. And I said, hey, you got an office I can do this in? So that's how we did that one. So you'll see some background there if you actually go back and look at it. But we're excited today to have Karen on board with us, and we're going to talk about some things that maybe you can learn in terms of actually working with the government, contracting with the government, and some of the things that Apex can bring in assistance to you. So Karen, welcome.
Thank you.
So why don't we start out? You can kind of introduce yourself and introduce the Apex Accelerator program.
Sure. Karen Wivell. I'm the Associate Director for the Central Ohio region of the Apex Accelerator program. I've been doing this for 12 years now, which is hard for me to believe. Apex Accelerators, we are a grant funded, similar to the SBDC, although unlike the SBDC, who gets their funding from the SBA, we get our funding from the Department of Defense's Office of Small Business Programs, also from the state of Ohio. Our Central Ohio team, there are 4 of us here in the Central Ohio region. We are also funded by Ohio University. So we're Ohio University employees. So what that means, though, with all that grant funding, is all of our services are at no cost to our small business community here in Central Ohio. Our role is to assist businesses who want to expand their market footprint by selling to government agencies. And that's at all levels of government, federal, state, or local. It's similar to selling to the commercial market, but different. So there are a lot of rules and regulations, registrations you might have to do, all sorts of things, and we're there to hold your hand through that process, help you understand the governmentese that's in those documents so you can make that go, no-go decision on pursuing those contracts to expand your market.
That sounds great. So why don't we start out with just talk about what it means to do business with the government, and kind of what constitutes government. Because I think everybody thinks about federal, right? But there's a lot of other opportunities that actually may be easier.
Yeah, especially now. But yeah, so the federal government obviously is the largest buyer of goods and services probably in the world, frankly. Over $1 billion worth of goods and services are purchased by the federal government. But there's also state governments. And that's, state of Ohio, state of Pennsylvania. There's local governments. You've got county, you've got city. You're hearing from a lot of them today. School systems, port authorities, airports, libraries. These are governmental entities. And so as governmental entities, they do have to buy things to operate, but they might have a different set of rules at each level. Each level has their own set of rules, registration, things you got to be aware of to go after that work.
So let's start with, eventually, next I kind of want to talk about maybe some specifics about thinking about federal, state, local, and the various entities at the local level. But why should somebody do business with the government, and kind of at what stage of their business operation or growth should they really be thinking about this if this is not how they didn't go in it saying, hey, I'm going to work with the government?
Right. Well, typically the government, they're kind of risk averse, right? They're spending taxpayer dollars. So typically they don't like to risk a government contract on a brand new business, unless, of course, right now in the federal space, if you're an innovation company, if you're coming up with a new technology that the government would be really interested in, They're willing to work with startup entrepreneurs on developing that technology, but typically they want to see you can do what you say you can do, that you've been doing it, you've got a cash flow, so that if they give you a contract, that they have a more assurance that you're going to be able to perform by showing you have that track record of performing in your commercial work. And it can be commercial work. What I say the benefit of doing with the government, for me, the biggest example of why was during COVID. We had a lot of clients that were bottoming out because their commercial business was tanking because of the shutdown. Businesses were shut down, but government was still operating. And I had clients whose government contracts kept them afloat during that time. It's a way to diversify. Diversification is key. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
You know, the diversification point, I think it's really important is, again, a lot of companies, they may be doing X, whatever that is. And then, somebody says, hey, I got this from the government or something like that. If they make a determination that, hey, they're ready to explore that opportunity, but again, they have to have the type of business that the government would buy products from.
Correct.
And it could be services, but
they buy services as well.
Talk a little bit about, making that jump from one, being able to determine, is this even something I should be thinking about as a for-profit business that's selling on the private market, and what should be kind of some early steps to think about this?
So I'll tell you what I do with my new clients. I would say, come to us. We'll look at your business, look at what you're good at, and try to help you do the market research to determine, is there a market? Especially if, services, if you can travel, is it local? Who's buying it? Who are they buying it from? We have access to a lot of databases that you may not have in the commercial sector, though I think SBDC does. But we can look at what the government has been paying for your types of goods and services and who they've been buying it from. So you can do that competitive analysis as a business owner to determine if this is the right space for you. And then once we figure out where your best chance of success is, then that's when we start helping you with the registrations, certifications, looking for those opportunities, networking. Let's figure out where is your best chance of success. And if I tell you don't have a chance of success, I'm still doing my job, because that frees up your time of spinning your wheels on something that the government just doesn't buy, and you're going to focus more on your commercial market.
So one that's really important is you guys don't have to try to figure this out on your own. So, obviously you can work with us at the SBDC, but we would ultimately connect you with Apex, with the Apex team here in Franklin County, Vicki and the other folks on your team, to basically do this process of getting you to understand what's involved and is it a fit for you. So again, you don't have to figure this out on your own. We have that capability available for you. So let's kind of go down the list here a little bit and kind of talk about, I think these kind of have similarities, working with the federal government, with like the state of Ohio or other state entities, and maybe even some of the larger metropolitans like Columbus.
Sure. So what I like to explain to my people, when they come in to talk to us, if they're looking at government, you've got to figure if they're governed by a different legislative body, they're going to have their own way of doing things. So, federal government is governed by Congress, state of Ohio, city councils govern than local government. Some of the bigger entities are going to have online registration systems where you're going to have register as a vendor, simply because the volume of what they buy. But, I came from a very small local government agency before I eventually ended up where I am. We had no registration. You had to call us. And, there wasn't even anything I did some of the purchasing for some materials. It wasn't anywhere on the website that's what I did, because I wore multiple hats at that agency. You had to call and say, who buys this? And then I would get that phone call. So, for me, it was just I had to get competitive quotes. That was my rule. I had to get 3 quotes. Other entities, because they're bigger, they have to post them online and they have to be up for a certain amount of time. And then they go through a review process. If it's a simple transaction of a good, if you're buying staples for your stapler, that's going to be a lot easier process to bid on than if you're bidding on something that's more knowledge-based, like an architect engineer or an IT consultant. You're going to have to do a little bit more work and prove your expertise. And there's going to be a different process. So it just depends what you're going after and what agency and level of government that you're pursuing.
So you mentioned, but I want to reiterate. So a lot of times there's some online vendor registration that they'll need to do. So at the federal government, what does that look like?
Sure. The federal government registration is called the System for Award Management, or SAM. And it is sam.gov. We help you through that process. You have to go through a few stages in this. They do a lot of checking, a lot of federal regulations. The federal regulations on contracting are called the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations. It just recently went through a major change. A lot of changes going on in the federal government right now, but you have to be registered and have the appropriate registrations in that federal system to be able to even bid on a contract. It doesn't mean you can't look at them, but you aren't able to bid on them unless you're a registered vendor. And you're going to see that with Ohio Buys. I mean, just this week, I helped somebody register with the state of Louisiana. I've helped people register with the state of West Virginia, with state of Pennsylvania. One registration doesn't fit all. You got to register with each individual system. Again, thinking about, is it a different legislative body governing them? It's not going to cross-populate. And that is one error I've seen a lot of companies think, because I'm registered in SAM, that means I can bid on Ohio. No, you can't. You got to register with Ohio.
And in the city of Columbus, they also have
They have their own vendor registration system.
Right?
Yes.
When you register with these folks, so with SAM or Ohio Buys, which is Ohio, or with the city of Columbus's vendor registration, typically, do you go through and you kind of identify what areas you might be focused on, then you get some sort of communication of opportunities that might be available?
Well, you have that, yes. And also, if you're an Apex client, we search all those websites for you. So once you register with us, we search thousands of websites of government procurement portals where it's a public registration online portal for opportunities for you to bid on, which is how our client found out about the opportunity in Louisiana and the other one in West Virginia. But it scans all those and helps you through that process, but it should. And each government entity, they live by codes, the bigger ones that have those vendor portals. You got to know your codes when you register. And each government entity, guess what? They use different codes. So the federal government uses NAICS codes. State of Ohio uses something called UNSPSC codes. There are NIGP codes, SIC codes. Depends on the agency. Again, different legislative body. They're going to have their own way of coding and putting things out. But that's why we're here to help you navigate.
So let's talk a little bit more about the local level. Mm-hmm. So kind of even getting down to you mentioned your background and things of that nature, but I think so we're not talking about the big metropolitans or even Franklin County or something like that. I live in Marysville. So you might think, okay, well, we're talking about the city of Marysville. Mm-hmm. But there's a variety of different possible jurisdictions there that you could sell to. Can you talk about what that could look like?
So you have townships, you have school systems, you have libraries. The government entity I worked for was a port authority. Port authorities are a governmental entity. We bought stuff. If it's just multi-layered. I used to work closely with a township. The township bought things. So you don't realize sometimes about how much government is there. A lot of people didn't realize libraries are considered government. They're public libraries.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's important that there are a lot of different opportunities there.
There are.
And at this lower local level with these smaller entities, it's a lot like just selling in the private market, to be honest with you. You network and you kind of go in and you meet these folks. And
I had to get 3 bids. That was the Ohio Revised Code. I had to get 3 competitive bids. But how did you find me? You had to make a phone call, and I'd meet with them, find out what they did. I kept Excel spreadsheets. And every time I needed something of what they sold, I'd shoot those guys an email and say, hey, looking for quotes for this. And I had to award it to the lowest bidder. Those were our rules. And those smaller entities, it's going to be some networking. There's dollar thresholds that maybe don't have to go out and get quotes depending on the dollar level. Again, different rules, different legislative bodies.
yeah, I like to point to this. So I was talking to some people, and we were talking about working with the government, and we're going to talk about a little bit about this. But obviously, there's been some changes at the federal level, which is trickling down.
It is.
But I was like, yeah, but there's a lot of local opportunities too. And I said, I can look out my front window and they're tearing up the street in front of my house, and they're going to repave it, and they're putting in curbs, and they're doing all this stuff. Well, it's not the city employees that are doing that. They've contracted with somebody to come in and do that.
How to get into that city engineer's office.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And again, I think that you'll see with the larger entities, there may be bid opportunities that are sent out. Karen talked about that they go through and look at the different opportunities, send it out to their clients and things like that, that this might be something that's interesting. You mentioned getting something from the city of Westerville the other day. I get a number of things from there. They're constantly sending out stuff that they have opportunities for. So there are a lot of opportunities there. And would you say, what kind of businesses probably would not work with the government?
I would say, it's very location based. So I've had, especially people looking at federal government, do you have a daycare center? Do you have a restaurant? No, it's probably in that space. If you got a mom, a dry cleaner, something like that, it's very location based. It's not going to be a good spot for you. But we do say, and this is something a line I used to use all the time when we were talking about federal contracting, the government buys everything from paper clips to spaceships. So it's just determining if they really buy it. But those are a couple. Now, if you did catering, they do buy catering. They do event management. But if you're thinking, come into my restaurant, no.
Yeah, the thing, I think if you're thinking about the smaller entities too, and this is all of them, but if you're thinking about smaller entities, if they're putting on some sort of lunch and they need box lunches and stuff like that, if they're going to use federal public funds, they've got to follow the process. They can't just say, well, this is only a couple $100 and I'm not going to worry about it, because that could still pop up in an audit, which could be a problem.
Yeah, under certain dollar values is in the federal government space. It's depending on the dollar value of the buy on whether they have to put it out for bid.
So when you're thinking about local entities, again, it's more than just, okay, here's the city or here's the county. There's townships, libraries you mentioned,
school systems, colleges.
School systems. Yeah, and school systems in a lot of these smaller communities, those are huge.
Yeah. They're a lot of times the major employer.
Yeah. Right. And like, for example, living in Marysville, the Marysville Exempted Village School District, which my kids went to, it covers Marysville and the areas around, but there's also Fairbanks, there's also Jonathan Alder, there's also North Union. All of those really serve parts of Union County. So again, these are a lot of opportunities. I can't remember, I don't know if you know, but there's hundreds of school districts in the state of Ohio.
Hundreds.
Yeah. So they buy stuff, and they need people that can provide those types of services. So there could be opportunities there for that perspective.
Park systems, another one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We had a individual one time that got a pretty sizable contract. Now, this is from the city of Columbus, pretty sizable contracts to do mowing.
Yeah.
You
I
know.
see a lot of landscaping, plowing,
Yeah.
paving. Yeah.
So there are opportunities from that. So we've talked a little bit about creating a bid. So, if they need bids for something, or even if they say, okay, well, I need 3 bids, even if it's not as structured, talk about the kind of creating a bid. What is the process for creating a bid?
It's going to vary. There's no hard and fast rule. It's going to be depending on what the government agency is asking of you to receive with your bid. So I get asked all the time, can you give me a template? No, I can't. Because when you read through the solicitation, they're going to tell you how they want you to respond. And again, it's depending on how that buying officer at that governmental entity wants to hear from you. I was plain and simple, for me, tell me, here's what I want. How much are you going to charge me? And when can you deliver? But more complex things, it's going to depend on who's putting it out for bid. And you have to read the ask and follow it to a T. Follow it to a T. Because if you don't include something they've asked for, they're going to throw your bid in the trash. If you don't deliver your bid on time by the date, we had to timestamp our stuff. So if it wasn't there by the day and time that the bid closed, it was in the trash. It was not considered. I had a client at one point when I was working in Cleveland. They had a staff member who was supposed to put their bid in the mail, and they were called in sick, and they realized it was sitting on this guy's desk. They're like, oh, and it was a huge construction bid. So the company decided, okay, we got to drive down to Columbus, and we're going to deliver this. They got there 3 minutes late. It was time-stamped and thrown in the trash right in front of them. So a lot of stuff now is electronic, thankfully, right? Because I'm old and it was back in the day, right? But a lot of it's electronic, but pay attention to those due dates. Pay attention to how they want to receive your bid. Don't forget things. Don't give them more than what they're asking for. Follow it to a letter. And if you don't understand what they're asking for, come to us and we'll walk you through it. We'll even review your bid before you submit it. We cannot tell you how good it is, but we will look at the solicitation notice and look at your package and make sure you've done everything they've asked you to do. So it doesn't end up in the trash. At least it gets considered.
So when they think about bids, there's a couple of pieces. So one, they need to be able to articulate that they can provide the service, that they have the expertise, they have the infrastructure, they can do this, so that, when the government, if they say, yeah, we're going to go with you, they know that you can do the work. Mm-hmm. But as the small business owner, as the entrepreneur, when they're creating a bid, I think I see where, number one, they don't know how to create how much they're going to charge, the pricing on the bid. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So government, you have to have the cash flow and capital to perform on the contract. In the federal space, you perform on the contract, you invoice, they have 30 days to pay you by law. I happen to know the city of Cleveland is 90 days. Yeah. So you got to have the cash flow, and you have to understand what your costs are going to be in performing that contract. So if it's a good, and I can tell you horror stories. If it's a good, you have to buy that good. You have to pay for the delivery, any packaging that you're going to have to do, your overhead in performing that contract. You've got to wrap all those costs into your bid. And then you have to make sure you've got your cash flow in place to wait to get paid. And that's when I'm reaching out to these guys because I'll have people come out to me. I can help you do market research and tell you, historically what they've been paying for it. But I have no idea what your cost of doing business is and how much profit you're going to want to make. That's when the SBDC comes in. For us, there are right-hand people on this. As soon as someone needs help on that, I'm like, go to the SBDC, walk through what your costs, make sure you're capturing all the costs on performing on that contract before you place the bid. Because once you place the bid and they accept it, that's a contract. And they're not going to pay you extra and you say, oh, I forgot to include shipping. Oh, well, too bad, so sad for you. You want to capture those costs. So you make your profit and you can cover your overhead. You can pay your people. You can pay your electrical bills. You got to roll all of that into your bid cost.
We talk about that a little bit more in terms of how do you balance, okay, I want to get the bid. I don't know what anybody else is bidding. And I know that they're likely looking for a lower cost bid. How do I balance coming up with the bid number that I think is going to be accepted and making sure that I have enough in there that I can benefit from it, I can profit from it?
Don't bid if you're not going to profit. Plain and simple. You got to look at your costs and put in your best effort, put in your best bid. You got to determine how much of a profit you want to make. But if you don't know your costs, you don't want a business isn't in business to lose money. And winning a contract and you're going to lose money does no benefit for your business. And if you can't meet the cost line that the government's looking for, then look elsewhere. Or look at analyzing your business, working with the SBDC. And there are ways that you can cut costs within your business to make you more competitive. And that's, again, where I send you to these guys, because they can do that analysis of your business. Are there ways? Are there better suppliers? Are there ways that I can cut costs to make me more competitive in that market if it's something I want to do? But never go into and bid on a contract if you know you're going to lose money. Don't do it. It's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt your business.
Yeah, and that's where we can kind of go through and help you really work through your numbers, make sure you work through that. And it may be a situation where, hey, I need to charge this amount, but I don't think that's going to work. I think that's going to be too high. So, I mean, we can have conversations. I think you guys can have conversations about, what, and you mentioned this, what can we kind of reduce? Or is there a way I can cut my cost, or I can do something, I can buy my supplies from someplace else or whatever that will allow me to bring that money down and go from there?
Yes. Never bid if you're going to lose money. It's not worth it.
No. And I've seen a lot of people do it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it hurts in the long run, right? Because then that government agency is thinking that that's a good competitive price. It hurts everybody. It hurts everybody. And you think, oh, I can charge them this low price once and then I can raise it next time. No, they're going to be expecting the same low prices. You're stuck. Don't do that.
Absolutely. So let's kind of shift a little bit. So I mentioned before, and I think we are all aware that a lot of stuff changing, shifting at the federal level, and the federal level is where a lot of this stuff initiates. I mean, you're going to get, a lot of times, you may get a contract with the state, maybe even a contract with the local, and the funds have come from the federal to the state to the local. Right. It's just flowed down, and but a lot of that process has stopped or changed anyway, and it's continuing to change, and also we have a lot of folks that are interested in certifications and things of that nature, and that is also changing from the governmental system. Not saying that you shouldn't get the certification, but I think it's a little different now than it was in the past. So can you that's a big thing here. We could probably take the next couple hours, but if you could wrap that up in a couple minutes.
So right now, there are federal government set-asides for small business, and federal government. 23% are set aside for small business competition. Of that, by statute, 5% for 8A, which is for minority-owned, 5% for women-owned small business, 3% for hub-zone businesses, 3% for service-disabled veteran. There are different qualifications for each of these. However, right now, the 8A program is going under increased scrutiny. And I believe it's being reviewed currently by the Supreme Court. I was just explaining, we used to, part of the narrative, you have to explain a narrative now in the 8A program. 8A is for minority or socially or economically disadvantaged businesses. It used to be that it was assumed if you were a minority or a woman in some, or a person with disabilities, you could apply for the 8A program. Now you have, then they changed it. You had to provide personal narratives of how you've been discriminated against as a person. Recently, I had a client a disabled client that applied and was rejected. He had the personal narratives of his disability and discrimination, but they were now asking for proof on how it impacted the cash flow and business opportunities for his business. So the bar keeps getting raised, and the whole program is now being reviewed in the Supreme Court, or it's in the queue. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. WOSB program, a new change that just happened in the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. It is a actual certification program, and again, if you're WBE with the state of Ohio, remember that's not going to cross over to the federal. You have to go through a separate application process to be WOSB. But in the federal program, it's only for certain NAICS codes. Again, those codes that identify what type of business you are. The change that just happened on WOSB is in subcontracting. So in the federal government, if somebody a large business gets a large contract, they have by statute, they have to award part of that business to small businesses. They're given goals, and they have to submit a subcontracting plan. Something that just changed recently, the dollar value of those contracts that they have to award small business contracts, the dollar value went up. For most contracts now, it's $900,000. If a large business gets a $900,000 and up contract, they have to award subcontracts to small businesses. And it's $2 million for construction now. Where the WSB situation comes into play is these large primes used to be able to get WSB credit if they self-certified as a WSB. That is now gone. They can only get credit and award WSB set-asides for those large prime contractors if you have that federal WOSB certification. So that is new. Right now, the SDVOSB and the hub zone programs, there's no rule changes on those yet. But I do know the federal systems on processing those applications. We just had that federal government shutdown where applications weren't getting reviewed and processed. And then I know on the veteran side, I've had a number of veteran-owned clients that are having problems with the online application portal, and they were hoping to have it work. We were told it was supposed to be fixed by this week, but my client just reached out to me Monday, and there are still problems with the system. And I also had a client reach out. There are now problems with the hub zone application system. They were having problems, and there are 800 numbers to the federal government for help, and no one's answering them. So they're coming to us, and we're doing our best. But that's what's going on. It's a fluid situation.
So when we talked before, you made a distinction, which I thought was interesting. I think a lot of people thought that, I need to be certified to be able to do this. And so talk about the difference between, there's a difference between certification and procurement.
Yes. So if you are registered as a vendor, you can bid on anything that goes out bid unless it's set aside for a certain certification. So what certifications do is they help eliminate competition. They don't guarantee a contract. And I'm going to use my food analogy because I always do that. I love food. I love cupcakes. The government's looking for a really good cupcake. You got to prove you can deliver a good cupcake. It doesn't matter how many certifications, which I call the sprinkles, how many sprinkles you have on your cupcake. If your cupcake doesn't taste good, they're not going to buy it. They're buying cupcakes. And if you've got those sprinkles of that certification, that might help eliminate competition. You still have to have the good cupcake. So I always say, you got to focus on what your business and how good you are. And I'm not saying don't get certifications. Again, they help eliminate competition because of those set-asides. If there's a solicitation out there for MBE or WOSB or 8A, and you've got that, that means only other companies that have that sprinkle can compete. So you've eliminated a lot of competition. Small business in the federal government is self-certification, just registering in SAM. They ask you NAICS codes, they ask you sales volume, number of employees. The size standards vary by NAICS code, that's why they ask. And then it tells you if you're a small business. So you can compete for any small business set aside. If you're an 8A or a hub zone, you can also compete for the small business. But guess who can't? The big guys can't. So you have a better chance of success because you're eliminating competition, but it's not guaranteeing success. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. So we got a few more minutes, but I'm going to take one question, but you raised your hand, so I'll take yours.
We do not help with that. If you were a nonprofit wanting to compete on government contracts, we could help you do that. You would not be able to qualify as a small business as a nonprofit. You're considered other than small. So you wouldn't be able to get any of the federal set-asides as a nonprofit. But it doesn't mean you couldn't compete because a lot of nonprofits win government contracts.
And that's a great question in terms of nonprofits. And I know there's probably some nonprofits in here in terms of being able to compete for opportunities. If a nonprofit's a business. So, I mean, if you're able to do that, as far as actually setting it up, we can give you some guidance on that. So. Yeah, well, like I said, we can talk about that after a bit. But before we go, I do want to get your opinion. So later today, as I mentioned before, we're going to have individuals. We do have some folks from CODA already here that are going to be talking about opportunities that they may have and how to interact with them. We're going to have Columbus State talking about some of the processes and opportunities here, and we're going to have a variety of prime contractors here. Any advice for the folks here as we're interacting with these folks and networking and how to do that?
Present yourself at how good you are at what you do and how hiring you as a subcontractor is going to benefit their business. And that is my word of advice for anybody that comes to me, whether you're going directly to a government agency or not. You don't lead in that I'm a small business or I'm woman-owned or minority-owned. Yeah, lead in on what you do and how doing work with you is the best decision they could make, because you're going to help that business and their bottom line and performing on their contracts, or you're going to help that government agency meet their goals. You're here to help them. And right now we're promoting, don't think just going direct to government. Often getting your foot in the door as a subcontractor is a great way to get started. It's a great way to get started.
And, in your situation, so let's say that you are out here and you want to interact with Russilli. Russilli's doing some work here on campus. They're the prime contractor with Columbus State, who is a government entity. And you may not be dealing with the government per se, but you're dealing with the prime contractor. So in essence, you are
dealing with the government. And guess what? All those government rules and regulations are going to flow down to you. You've got to follow those same rules. And there's cybersecurity rules in the federal government. We didn't even touch on that, but there are a lot of rules and regulations as a subcontractor. They flow down to you even though you're not the direct prime.
Absolutely. So with that, we're going to end this session of Small Business Breakthroughs. Thank to Karen for participating today.